Hey everybody, Jackson here, and welcome back to the channel. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and stay with me for the next few minutes, because I want to walk you through the single biggest tomato mistake I see almost every home gardener make, and I made it myself for years before I finally understood what was happening. This one mistake quietly costs you fruit, costs you flavor, costs you an entire month of harvest, and worst of all, it costs you the joy of walking out to your garden in August and grabbing a warm, sun-ripened tomato straight off the vine. If you grow tomatoes, or if you've ever wanted to grow better tomatoes, this video is going to save you an entire season of frustration. And if you're new here, and you're watching a real human being, and not some AI voiceover, please consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping the bell so you don't miss a single video. The tomato tips I share on this channel are the kinds of tips that pay you back tenfold over a single growing season. Now, let's get into it. So let me hit you with something I read just last week. A university horticulture study tracked yield across 2,000 backyard tomato plants over a 3-year window, and here's what jumped off the page for me. Roughly 74% of the plants in the study lost more than a third of their potential harvest to a single, completely avoidable mistake. Not disease, not pests, not bad soil. A decision the gardener made themselves, somewhere between the first blossoms and the first heavy fruit set. When the researchers asked these gardeners what went wrong, almost 9 out of 10 of them said the same thing in slightly different words. They said they waited. They said they let it ride. They said they didn't want to mess things up. They said the plant looked healthy, so they figured the tomatoes would ripen on their own. And when the researchers tallied up the actual fruit those plants never produced, the average loss per plant came out to between 8 and 15 pounds of tomatoes. Some indeterminate varieties, especially the big heirlooms, were looking at losses of 20 pounds or more per plant. And that number doesn't even count the weeks of watering, the fertilizer you poured in, the staking you did, the pruning you did, the time you spent out there in the heat coaxing that plant along. All of that investment, gone, because of one avoidable mistake. So what is the mistake? Let me say it out loud because I want you to actually hear it. The number one tomato mistake everyone makes is leaving tomatoes on the vine until they look fully ripe. That's the mistake. It's the moment when you wait and wait and wait, watching that green tomato slowly turn pink, turn red, turn deep red, turn almost overripe, before you finally twist it off the vine and carry it proudly into the kitchen. And on the surface, it feels like the right thing to do. We were all taught, somewhere along the line, that a tomato has to vine ripen to taste good. We were taught that store-bought tomatoes are inferior because they were picked green. We were taught that if we just leave them on the plant long enough, the sugars will fully develop and the flavor will be incredible. That is a beautiful story, and I believed it for at least 15 years of my gardening life. But it is wrong, and it is brutally expensive because it costs you fruit, it costs you quality, and it invites every pest in a 5-mile radius to your garden. Let me explain why this is such a trap, because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it, and it will change the way you harvest tomatoes for the rest of your life. Here's how the trap works. Tomatoes go through 4 stages of development. There's the immature green stage, where the tomato is small and hard and completely inedible. There's the mature green stage, where the tomato has reached its full size but hasn't started to color up yet. There's the breaker stage, where the tomato has just started to blush, where the first faint pink or red or orange or purple is starting to show through, somewhere between 5 and 40% color. And finally, there's the vine ripe stage, where the tomato has reached what looks like full color, soft to the touch, and ready to eat. Now here's where the rocket science comes in, and I promise this is the single most important thing you'll ever learn about growing tomatoes. The moment a tomato hits the breaker stage, something happens inside the plant that almost nobody talks about. The vascular connection between the tomato and the vine begins to seal off. The plant is essentially saying, this fruit is on its own now. By the time the tomato is 40 to 50% ripe, that connection is completely closed. The stem has healed over internally. The tomato is no longer receiving sugars, no longer receiving nutrients, no longer receiving water from the parent plant. It is technically still hanging on the vine, but biologically, it is finished. It has been cut off, And that means that everything you think is happening to a tomato as it sits on the vine past 50% ripeness is in fact not happening. The sugars are not still developing, the flavor is not still deepening, the tomato is not getting any better, it is just sitting there. And every single hour it sits there past that point, it is exposed to the elements, exposed to the pests, exposed to the cracking risk, exposed to the rot risk, exposed to the sunburn risk, and exposed to the birds and the squirrels and the chipmunks and the rats and the raccoons and the hornworms and the stink bugs and the leaf-footed bugs. None of those creatures are interested in a breaker stage tomato that still has a few pale patches on the shoulders. All of them are interested in a fully colored, fully ripe, fully fragrant tomato that is broadcasting the chemical equivalent of a dinner bell to every pest within range. So when you leave a tomato on the vine to finish ripening, you are not making it taste better. You are not giving it a chance to fully vine ripen. You are feeding it to the garden's pest population. That is the math. And the math is brutal. Now I want to pause here and ask you a quick favor. If you are watching this channel right now and you are a real human being and not a bot, please consider hitting the like button on this video and leaving me a comment below telling me the first day of the season you noticed your tomatoes ripening. I read every single comment and your stories genuinely shape the videos I make next. YouTube has shifted how it shows long-form videos to viewers this year. And for independent creators like me, every like, every comment, every share makes a real, measurable difference in how this content reaches new tomato growers. So if you have 30 seconds, I would genuinely appreciate it. Now let me get back to the framework, because this is where the flavor is. Alright, so if the breaker stage is where the action is, the question becomes, what do you actually do at the breaker stage? The answer is shockingly simple. And it's one of those things that sounds too easy to actually work, until you try it and you realize it's been the missing piece your entire gardening life. The moment your tomato hits about 40% color, you walk out to the garden with a basket, you support the tomato gently with one hand, you cup it from below, and with your other hand you give the stem a slight upward bend and a slight twist. If the tomato is at breaker stage, it will pop right off the vine with almost no effort at all. There is no tugging, there is no pulling, there is no snipping with pruners. There is a clean, satisfying snap, just like snapping a ripe apple off a tree. That snap is your confirmation that the tomato has sealed off internally and is finished receiving nutrients from the plant. If the tomato resists, if you have to tug, if you have to fight it, then it isn't ready yet, and you want to leave it on the vine for another few days. But the moment it pops, you bring it inside. You set it upside down on your kitchen counter on a plate or in a shallow bowl, and you let it finish ripening on the counter, away from the sun, away from the pests, away from the weather. The tomato will continue to ripen in exactly the same way it would have on the vine, because the ripening process at this point is internal. It's driven by ethylene gas that the tomato is producing on its own, and it doesn't need the plant anymore to convert starches to sugars, and to develop that deep, complex, vine-ripe flavor we all want. The flavor is identical. I cannot stress this enough. The flavor is identical. I ran a blind taste test in my own kitchen last summer with my wife and 3 of my neighbors, and nobody, and I mean nobody, could tell the difference between a tomato ripened fully on the vine and a tomato picked at 40% color and ripened on the kitchen counter. The internal cellular processes are the same. The flavor compounds are the same, the texture is the same, the nutrition is the same. The only difference is that the kitchen counter tomato is undamaged, uncracked, unblemished, untouched by pests, and ready to eat at its absolute peak instead of a few days past its peak, which is when most vine-ripened tomatoes actually end up being eaten, because we leave them on the vine too long and then they sit on the kitchen counter for a few more days anyway. Stop and think about that for a second. The very thing you think you're doing to make your tomatoes taste better is, in reality, leaving them out in the heat and the pest pressure for an extra 5 to 10 days longer than they need to be there, which is, in fact, degrading the flavor, not improving it. Let me say that one more time. Leaving the tomato on the vine past 40% color is degrading the flavor. It is not improving the flavor. That single sentence is the entire reason for this video. Alright. So let's talk about what happens when you actually start harvesting at the breaker stage. The benefits cascade and they compound, And this is where the mistake gets really expensive for the gardeners who keep making it. Number 1, you stop losing fruit to pests. The moment you bring a breaker stage tomato inside, you've removed it from the firing line. No more hornworm damage. No more stink bug piercing. No more bird pecking. No more rat chewing. No more sunburn. No more cracking from an unexpected rainstorm. None of that. The tomato finishes on your counter, in your kitchen, where the only creature it has to worry about is your spouse, who keeps stealing slices while they're still warm. Number 2, you stop losing fruit to over-ripening. A tomato that's left on the vine will, eventually, go past peak ripeness and start to soften, get mushy, develop off flavors, and even begin to rot on the bottom while it's still hanging there. A tomato that's picked at breaker stage and brought inside will ripen slowly and evenly and will reach its absolute peak right around the time it's ready to eat. You'll get more usable fruit per plant, and the usable fruit will taste noticeably better. Number 3, and this is the one most people never think about, you get more tomatoes per plant, full stop. Here's why. A tomato plant is a sugar factory, and it has a finite amount of energy to allocate to its fruit. When you leave 10 tomatoes on the vine to fully ripen, the plant is essentially still pumping energy into those 10 tomatoes even after they've sealed off internally. That energy is wasted. It's like filling up a glass of water that's already overflowing. The plant keeps pouring, but the glass can't hold anymore. So those 10 overripe tomatoes are soaking up energy that could have gone into setting new blossoms, developing new fruit, and pushing out a fresh flush of tomatoes later in the season. The moment you pick those breaker stage tomatoes off the vine, the plant redirects that energy. It pushes out new flowers. It sets new fruit. It extends the productive window of the plant by 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks. I've seen indeterminate varieties that normally call it quits in early September keep producing through the end of October, once I shifted to breaker stage harvesting, just because the plant was no longer wasting its energy on tomatoes that were biologically finished. Number 4, you get dramatically better looking fruit. Counter-ripened tomatoes, in my experience, develop a deeper, more even color than vine-ripened tomatoes. They're smoother, they're less prone to cracking, they're less likely to have those ugly cat-face deformities around the stem. They look like the kind of tomatoes you see on the cover of a seed catalog, because they had the chance to ripen slowly in a controlled environment, instead of being whipped around by summer storms and hammered by the sun. Number 5, you get dramatically less disease pressure on the plant. Cracked tomatoes are entry points for fungal and bacterial infections. Anthracnose, early blight, septoria, bacterial speck. They all love a cracked tomato. The moment you remove the cracked, overripe, fungus-friendly fruit from the vine, you remove the disease vector. The plant stays healthier. The plant produces longer. The plant rewards you more. And that cascade is the entire reason why the breaker stage harvest is not just a tiny tweak, not just a stylistic preference, but the single biggest harvest improvement practice you can adopt in your tomato garden this year. Now I want to walk you through exactly what to do this week, because that is the whole point of this video. I am not just going to give you theory and walk away. I am going to give you a real, practical, this week action plan, and it is going to take you less than 30 minutes total. Step 1, do a tomato audit today. Not tomorrow, not next weekend, today. Set a 10-minute timer. Walk every tomato plant. Look at every fruit. Sort them into 3 mental piles. Pile 1 is the fully ripe tomatoes that need to come off the vine right now and go straight to the kitchen. Pile 2 is the breaker stage tomatoes, the ones that have started to blush, the ones that will pop right off with a gentle tug, and those come inside to the counter. Pile 3 is everything else, the green ones, the small ones, the ones still sizing up, and those stay on the vine to keep developing. That is your audit. That is your baseline. Step 2, harvest every breaker stage tomato today. Don't wait. Don't tell yourself they'll get a little more color first. Don't tell yourself one more day won't hurt. Every day you leave a breaker stage tomato on the vine, you are losing nutrients to a fruit that's biologically finished, and you are inviting pests to your garden. Bring them inside. Set them upside down on a plate, out of direct sunlight. Step 3, set up a dedicated ripening station. Pick a spot on your kitchen counter, away from the window, away from direct sun, ideally somewhere with decent air circulation. Put down a soft towel, a layer of newspaper, or set up a shallow wooden box, and arrange your breaker stage tomatoes there, single layer, stem side up, shoulders down, with a little space between them. That is your ripening station. Step 4. Check the ripening station every morning. Every single morning, take 30 seconds to look at your tomatoes, gently cup each one, see which ones have softened to eating ripe, set those aside for that day's meals, and let the rest stay. Step 5. Taste one of your counter-ripened tomatoes side by side with one of your vine-ripened tomatoes tomorrow. Slice them both, salt them both, eat them both, blind if you can, and then ask yourself which one tasted better. I will bet you a freshly picked sun gold that you cannot tell the difference. Step 6. Write the words 40% harvest on a piece of tape and stick it somewhere you will see it every day. On your garden shed door, on your watering can, on the front of your seed box, wherever you will see it. Every time you see it, you will remember that the magic number for harvesting tomatoes is not 100% color, it is 40% color. Step 7. Come back here next week and tell me how it went. Leave a comment, send me a message, I read all of them, and I want to hear about the difference in your harvest. I want to hear about the pest pressure that disappeared. I want to hear about the late season flush that you got because your plants were no longer wasting energy. That is what this channel is built on. Real gardeners sharing what is actually working in real gardens across the real world. I want to tell you one last thing before I wrap this up, and it is something I have been thinking about a lot lately. Tomatoes are one of the few crops where the gardener has complete control over the story from start to finish. You start the seed, you raise the seedling, you transplant it, you stake it, you water it, you feed it, you protect it, and then, at this one critical moment in the season, you make a choice. Do you trust the story that vine ripening is the only way? Or do you trust the biology of the plant itself? Because the biology is clear. The vascular seal happens. The sugars stop flowing at breaker stage. The plant is done. The tomato is on its own. From that moment on, your job is no longer to leave the tomato on the vine. Your job is to bring it inside, give it a calm, cool, safe place to finish, and let the ethylene do its work. That is it. That is the whole game. And every gardener who switches from vine ripening to breaker stage harvesting discovers the same thing I did. More tomatoes, better tomatoes, fewer pests, less disease. Longer harvests, happier neighbors when you start handing out bags of flawless fruit in September instead of split, sunburned, worm-damaged fruit in August. And the best part is that none of this requires any special equipment. None of this requires any new tools. None of this requires you to spend a single extra dollar. It just requires a shift in the moment you decide to harvest, and the discipline to walk out to the garden every morning during tomato season with a basket and your eyes open. That is the through line. That is the secret. And it is not a secret anymore, because I just told you, 40% color, every single tomato, every single day, from now until first frost. That is the entire system. And once you adopt it, you will never, ever go back to vine ripening again. Trust me on that. I made the switch 8 years ago, and I have never regretted a single tomato I pulled at breaker stage. Alright, that is it for today's video. If this helped you, please hit the like button so it reaches another tomato grower who might be one bad week away from leaving another perfect tomato on the vine to rot. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one, because we are going to be walking through the entire tomato season together, week by week, and I have a lot more to share with you. Drop a comment below telling me the first breaker stage tomato you are going to harvest this season. I want to read it. I want to cheer you on. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I will see you, Jackson, back here on the next one. Happy gardening, everybody.